thank you for coming out tonight to pay your respects and to honor Coach Joe Paterno. It is truly a testament to his legacy and the way he shaped this university to see so many students, alumni, and friends here on the steps of Old Main. Many of you can attest to the fact that Joe wasn't just a football coach. He was a member of the Penn State community, and he invested all that he had into making it a better place. Even though he was famous everywhere he went, he still took the time to talk to students and act just as your average Joe would have acted. I work in the Lash building, and I would often see Joe coming in and out of the office. I'll never forget the way he called me kiddo when he passed my desk, or the time he yelled at me for being on Facebook at work, or when he asked me how my exam went after seeing me study for a week solid. I'll always remember how much he cared, how hard he worked, and how easily he loved. We have gathered a few former and current players here to share with us the way that he has impacted them, not only as athletes, but as men. To speak first, we have a current player, Mike Wallace.
Good evening. Today, we have experienced a great loss. But this loss is incomparable to what we have gained, what we have learned from Coach Joe Paterno. When asked to speak here tonight, I'm at a loss for words because there's really no words that can describe what Joe meant to me, my fellow teammates, everybody here in the audience today. The only testament to what Joe really meant is what you see right here, right now, tonight. That's a great community, a great Penn State community who stands strong in the midst of all this adversity, in the midst of all these trials and tribulations, in the midst of tragedy. Joe Paterno was one of the best coaches I've ever had. He recruited me out of Silver Spring, Maryland, a lonely two-star athlete, when everybody said that I couldn't play football at the D1 level, I wouldn't be able to make it on this great stage. Joe Paterno was the one who saw that special light within me and saw my potential. And one of the last things he told me, I got the opportunity to speak with him one-on-one, was he said that your time is coming. Keep working hard, your time is coming. He recruits based off of character. He recruits based off of the young men that you see today. We're not just athletes. We're not just students. We are a reflection of who Joe Paterno was. And I can't explain how much he means to me as a coach. He shaped me into the man that I am today, and he's brought everybody here together on this very night. You know, every so often you encounter certain people in your life. God places people in your lives for a particular reason. And it's clear today why Joe Paterno was placed in our lives. It's clear why he walked this earth was to basically change the world, change the game of football, change the way we as Penn Staters see ourselves as a community and as people. Joe Paterno will never be forgotten because truly, legends never die. Thank you.
be the president of Paternoville, John Teesey.
Good evening. I would first like to start off by speaking for Paternoville, for the officers and participants of Paternoville, as well as all of you, and extending our deepest sympathies to Mrs. Sue Paterno and the Paterno family. And also, our hearts are with all players and coaches, past and present, who have had the blessing of learning from Coach Paterno. I stand up here tonight to represent all of you, those of us who barely knew Joe Paterno, and yet he was like a part of our family. For us, he was sort of a hilarious, grandfatherly figure that we looked up to as bigger than life, bigger than Penn State. For generations past, he was a dynamic, sharp, successful figure who, again, seemed bigger than life. I currently serve as the president of Paternoville. I'm a 4-year participant of and 3-year officer of Paternoville. I'm proud to say tonight that we made the decision weeks ago that we would be keeping the Paternoville name moving forward, which we are happy to say we did when Coach Paterno was aware of, that we would be continuing that tradition. That means a lot to us, and I know it means a lot to him and his family. You know, I was watching the movie Say Anything today, for those of you 80s movies buffs. There's a line in there that says, "Be a man, not just a guy." I think that line really characterizes what Joe Paterno was for all of us. You know, be a man. He was an honorable man who obviously touched the lives of so many students who, again, we barely knew him. I spent a whole semester in Joe Pot class with Mike Portman learning about Joe Paterno, and I feel like I barely even knew him. I only shook his hand once in all the time that I've been at Penn State and all the time that I grew up in Pennsylvania, yet it feels like losing a family member. And, you know, that really says a lot about who Joe Paterno was and, you know, what he did for Penn State and for Pennsylvania. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's freezing. I'm sure Coach Paterno will be out here telling everybody to get back to the books. Just in closing, thank you, and we love you, Joe.
Next to speak, we'll have quarterback Shane McGregor.
If there was one thing that I think Coach Paterno was the king of, it was stories. Ask him about a game from 1960 or 1980 or a game that didn't even matter, or a practice from August of '58. He could tell you a story about it. It would have a lesson, it would have characters, it would have a plot that would lead you with learning something. I think it's kind of fitting then when I looked at my experience with him as a story. It started, I guess, when I was still probably negative 20, negative 10 years old. My mom graduated here in late 97s. And on her day of graduation, she was walking around campus, kind of soaking in the sights and sounds with her roommate. And she turned to her roommate and said, "Man, I wish something would happen that could just punctuate with an exclamation point our Penn State experience." A few blocks later, on Park Avenue where they were walking, who comes moseying down the street but Joe Paterno? And he stopped and talked to them, shook their hands and said hello. And my mom considered that to be the most fitting exclamation point she could ask for. I think it's funny too then, whenever I actually got to come here. I grew up a Penn State fan, coming to games. It was always my dream to play here, but I never was quite sure that I actually could. I came as a walk-on, still am a walk-on, and I wasn't one of those highly recruited kids where Joe would come to my house or speak to me or anything like that. I was somebody that he expected to show up for work, to work hard, and do everything that he's done all of his life. So when I came here, my first ever conversation with Joe Paterno consisted of 2 sentences. It was in August of 2008. And it's a very sunny day out on the practice field over by Lash Football Building. And he says, just walking through the lines where we're stretching, he says, looks at me. I wasn't even sure he was looking at me at first, but he said, looks at me and says, pretty nice day, huh? And I said, yeah, coach, it's beautiful. And he walked along. It's a fitting start from a humble man and a humble beginning that wrote the story that I will surely never forget. The middle part of that story, like any story, had its ups and downs. We butted heads a little bit, which is funny because I thought that of anybody in college football, of any coach, of any player even, who I would most relate to, it would be him. He was an English major at Brown, a real lover of books. I'm an English major here in print journalism, a lover of writing, a lover of books. And in a sport where usually the only books you read are ones that have plays, having that common person, that common bond, is really, truly special. So I found it even more fitting when the last 2 sentences I talked to him were after one of the practices that we had in the week or so leading up to the last game he coached against Illinois. A little before, he had evidently read an article from the Collegian that they wrote about me, and I was very humbled by. And in it, I talked about, and they wrote about the fact that I'm writing a story, trying to write my own book. And real quick, it's a retelling of the story of Jesus, probably one of the best stories of all time, except it's in modern day, and he plays basketball. It sounds funny, but I show you, it's cool. Just wait. But he comes up to me, this time he's on a golf cart, sits up there, and he looks at me, and again, I wasn't quite sure he was looking at me, because he could have talked to anybody out there. But he said, hey, I heard you're writing a book. I'd like to talk with you about it sometime, maybe during the bye week when we have some time. I said, sure, coach, that sounds great. Now, as all of you know, the bye week came and went, and there wasn't really time for me to talk with Joe about my story. But I think it's fitting that the last game he coached had a storybook ending. Snow falling on the ground, last seconds of the game, and just inches away from defeat, Penn State pulls out the victory. It's also very, very fitting that on his birthday, came to my coach, quarterback coach, Paterno, like you guys know. And since I had never got to have that conversation with Joe on the bye week, I printed out chapter 1 of The Second Coming and gave it to him and said, if you could pass this on to Coach, that would be great. Now, I don't know if you ever read it, but from where he's at now, I think that somehow he'll get a copy of it when it comes out someday. But in reality, the one book that I know he prescribed to, and I do too, is probably the best book of all time, in my opinion. And in that book, they say that there's a time for everything. Time to live and time to die. Time to love, time to live, time for joy, time for sorrow, for pain, for triumph, all those things. The one thing, though, that there's always time for is love. I think that's what he wanted to live his life by. I think that's what he molded his career after. And I think he put all that love into Penn State. That book also says that love is patient, love is kind, love endures all things, and love never fails. If we all come together here, and if we live with that love that he lived with, this community, this school, this team, and everybody here will never fail.